I am NetMoverSitan. Welcome to the Urban Myth section of this Law Breakdown series. As in, the training wheels are off, you're on your own. Well, that's the general feeling that you'll probably get by this point. The library has grown since its beginnings. There's more space to fill. Also, what is an urban myth? It's a story or piece of information spread as if it's true. This can even be related to the one telling others about it. Although in this case within the city, it's likely that they're all true, and it's spread with the belief that it isn't true. Because if it is, you'd better pray that divine intervention is listening to you, as nothing else is going to help you. Next we have Piers Bistro. Now, as Mang Chi would put it, each district has its own distinct culture, its own customs, its own way of doing things. Although one district stands out among the others, or more specifically, the backstreets of District 23, W Corp territory, and also where those that used to be with the Hook Office came from before it was decimated. Okay, a bit worse than that. Well, you get the idea, by the library. The reason for this? It's full of cannibals. And that's the clientele that Piers Bistro caters to. A restaurant that serves dishes made from human bodies. I can see it happening something like this. Bonjour, Monsieur Lecter. Are you ready for your order? Good. So for your hors d'oeuvres, you want a Sam and Malcolm crepe. For your main course, you want a Dirk de l'Orange with seasonal vegetables. And for your dessert, you want a sherry pie with red cream. And for your aperitif, you want... What the were they thinking? I know that they're in a part of District 23, but it doesn't sound like the food situation in those backstreets is that desperate. This is considering that, unlike the rich, the rest consider cannibalism a taboo, and consider it best avoided, unless they're truly desperate. Yeah, it's usually the rich that eat human flesh, not out of desperation, but for leisure. Yeah, there's all entertainment in the city. So little that those that can afford to turn to cannibalism out of sheer boredom. I mean, it's not as if they can't afford food, even after crippling taxes and rents. But the backstreets of District 23, they pursue the ultimate flavour, and are willing to pursue this whatever the cost. Piers Bistro often trades with insane syndicates, or other groups that specialize in butchery for their ingredients that they need. The Axe Gang might be one of them. They prefer to catch their prey alive, so that they can give them a long drawn-out death, as they believe that it enhances the flavour. I mean, This would be bad enough if it was done with domestic livestock, never mind humans. Let's just get to those running it before I turn into a foul-mouthed Scottish chef and go, this, I'm out of here. This restaurant is screwed. Yeah. That's probably tame by his standards. Right, where were we? Oh, yes. The management. And believe me, they are a nasty piece of work. I mean, if their clientele are cannibals, what do you think they're like? Let's start with Pierre herself, the owner of Piers Bistro. While she appears polite, don't let that fool you. She is a fully functional sadist. Not the first that's seen in the Project Moon universe. Probably won't be the last either. One that dreams of becoming one of the 8 chefs, one of the stars of the city. Even so, she cares about her sous chef, Jack, valuing a promise that she made him regarding becoming one of the 8 chefs. She was driven to obsession towards becoming one of these, much like most cooks in the city. Having such high standards with her cuisine, wanting food that sends chills down the spine of the one eating it, rather than just making their eyes spin. Seeing casual quality food as beneath her. She is also obsessed with the detail of taste and the process of cooking that makes it. Conducting several experiments to make this happen, just like others would experiment to create more stimulating flavors. She also sees almost everyone as ingredients, as long as they're not too old, as they don't taste well to her. Seriously, where did Project Moon get their inspiration from? Silence of the Lambs? Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Night of the Living Dead? In combat, she wields a cooking knife. And she's even considered using monster meat due to its unique flavor. She's somehow able to make it edible, although that requires a dangerous journey to the outskirts. And considering the syndicates that prey on any unwary individual that they encounter, that and certain fixes that might cause problems, depending on the kind of fixer they are. This is a dangerous enough journey without them. Okay, the rats wouldn't be too much of a problem for them, but the syndicates don't take kindly to competitors as far as brutality is concerned. They're the ones that would cause problems for them. In fact, the most dangerous part of that journey is in the outskirts itself, as there are all kinds of dangers that exist there. At least most of the threats within the backstreets are human. Or at least... Okay, I'll get to that when it's nearer the time. As for her loyal sous chef, Jack, That's one human that isn't on the menu. He enjoys working with her on the dishes and accompanies her on hunts for ingredients. He has a calm temperament and makes sure that those that he captures receive as little damage as possible, as this lowers their quality, as far as he and Pierre are concerned. Yeah, he's as much a cannibal and a sadist as Pierre is, whom he has a lot of respect for, and is willing to help her achieve her dream, his promise to her. It's almost touching, isn't it? If we forget that this is a restaurant that wouldn't be out of place in a horror movie, that the censors would say, "There's no way we can release this. It's too disturbing, even for an adults-only rating." Apparently, he helps to supply the ingredients for Pierre to make meat pies with. Has he checked up with a demon barber? I'm sure that Mr. Todd would be happy to supply you. Oh, wait, never mind. He's fictional and on London's Fleet Street in the past and long dead. Then again, we don't know if that city, the one that Piers Bistro is in, is the only one. Although they aren't always as discriminating about the quality of their meat, as they make experimental dishes or even sausages out of what they can get from one of their suppliers, which can also contain rat meat in them. See what I mean? They do eat rats in the back streets, but it's usually out of desperation. Although only the sausages are usually served to their customers. As for one of their other suppliers, they sell in small quantities, but are good quality and pricey. That's something for their good dishes, more typically served to their customers. Backstreet Butchers are one of the independent groups that supply the restaurants of District 23 with the meats that they need to stay open. Yeah, any who are unfortunate to cross their paths and lack the means of defending themselves, they've had it. They won't just be killed, but they'll be part of the special of the day. If they're incredibly unfortunate. He's armed with a meat cleaver. As for where the story picks up, Pierre was frustrated with what could be considered the culinary equivalent of writer's block. Jack came into the room bringing some ingredients with him, as in people he captured. He needed to capture them himself as little piggies, the purveyors of the good quality product, and the musicians of Bremen that sold the lower quality but higher quantity product stopped trading with them. I doubt it's out of morality, considering that they sound deranged. At least enough to deal with those two nut jobs. They'd need a new place to hunt for their ingredients, due to their old spots being safeguarded by the Zwei Association. They take their work seriously. Pierre and Jack then spoke about their ambitions and about changing some of their dishes. Yeah, you'd be surprised how many different varieties you'd get out of... Oh, why am I talking about this? Oh, right. That's the purpose of this. Well, Pierre suggested using more aged ingredients, much to the disappointment of Jack, as he'd miss her pasty pies. Well, they talked about this as casually as some would decide to make something out of mutton rather than lamb. And I'm guessing pasty didn't mean people that were pasty looking, although that's also a possibility. She wanted a dish with a more original flavour. She wanted more monster meat on the menu. Depending on the definition of monster, this might not be cannibalism. She sees the library as a place where they can find this. Well, the alternative is a trip to the outskirts. Thankfully, she received an invitation to enter the library a while ago. She asked him to join her. He accepted. And you're probably asking, did they go immediately there? No! They had some preparations to make. And I'm not talking about combat preparations. While she was prepared to sign the invitation, the red invitation, she had Jack turn the ingredients into meat jam and instructed him to insert them into the machinery feet first, not head first, to prevent them from dying too quickly, as the more they suffer, the tastier their meat would be. They're even put on drips of anesthetics and repressors to stop them from dying too quickly when they're stored in the kneader. Oh, can we please just get on with this? I almost feel like I want to vomit. As they were observing this, Angela asked about cannibalism and how common it is in the backstreets. Roland replied with, "It isn't. It's a taboo, although Backstreets 23 is the exception to that rule." Their conversation confirms that each part of the backstreets has a different set of characteristics, depending on the district and the policy set by the nest and the wing. Thankfully, Roland has standards. He's never tried human meat. I wouldn't try it if it was offered to him. He might be aware of how cannibals are infected by prions from eating human meat. Yeah, he might be the arch-hole. But there's some things beneath even him. And we haven't even got to the nastier parts of him yet. But that can wait. When Pierre and Jack arrived in the library, Pierre noticed a new smell. Jack didn't like it. This unfamiliarity was what Pierre believed would bring forth some new ideas. They were then greeted by Angela. Pierre confused her for a fresh ingredient. And Jack commented on how top quality she looked. Pierre thankfully could tell the difference between human and android. It didn't kill her excitement, though, and asked how Angela would taste. Unfortunately for the psychos, Angela couldn't be harmed. It didn't stop Jack from wanting to test that out, only to be stopped by Pierre, telling him to mind his manners. Yeah, that's right, they're the Hannibal Lecter kind of cannibals. Those with standards. As Angela was the one who sent the invitation. He apologized to Angela, and Pierre politely requested to enter the library proper. They both died due to the librarians, not long after. Well, that's 2 less psychos to terrorize the city. You're probably surprised why Angela didn't get violent towards Pierre and Jack. Well, it's because it's not just not her role, it's also because why do that when you have others, such as Roland, Malkouf, and Yesod, do that for you? After they were added to the books within the library, Roland remarked on their nutcases and how it was best to minimize interacting with them. Angela thought that they were more well-mannered than Roland. Roland considered Angela naive when she said that, and told her in a patronizing way to, well, it's brave considering that she has enough control over reality within the library to give him a truly painful death. He advised her to run for her life if she meets a polite and well-mannered person in the back streets. The reason for this is, it's deceptive. It's used to draw in their potential victims and deal with them with as little effort as possible. I can believe that. Angela didn't get that, so Roland advised her not to use criteria to divide people into groups, to which is more insane, as it's pointless, and they exist pretty much anywhere where mental health is neglected, especially in that city. And she still didn't get it. I mean, it's about as comforting as a politician's smile, where usually it's intended to get you to lower your guard and believe whatever they say, rather than to question. The bigger the smile, the more that they want you to swallow. The same basic principle applies to the back streets, except with more violence and varying amounts of pain, depending on who is inflicting it. Roland, considering what you're like, and while some of what you say is, well, it could be charitably considered questionable, this is something that I can't really dispute. Yesod's first abnormality is the Forsaken Murderer. I described him as a cross between Hammerhead and Colossus in my Lobotomy Corporation law series, and that's still applicable in this. He's a prisoner that was put in a straitjacket due to his level of violence, and was so full of anger he spouted out profanity that a certain non-Nintendo-based Italian-American stereotype would go, "Whoa, that guy really is." It'd certainly make the Prince of Darkness himself go, "Whoa, that bloke needs to chill, man." And a certain foul-mouthed Scottish chef would probably be stunned into silence. And if that wasn't bad enough, his head turns into metal, making headbutts from him guaranteed lethal to most. This was due to that believe that medication solves everything. In this case, it made things worse. Well, certainly different. A cross between the demonically possessed and a metalhead that took their passion too far. He doesn't want pity. If anything, he pities others. He sees himself as a mess. And yet, he has accepted that he'll be feared all the time. Perhaps he already had some issues before he became what he was. He doesn't see why he has to be bound. Well, it's because you're a danger to others and yourself. What do you think? You even consider yourself free as any man. I highly doubt you're completely sane. Then again, I can talk. He's typically full of anger, but when he's up against someone with a status effect, he feels weak with fear and makes an effort to avoid confrontation due to being threatened with what is uncomfortable for him to feel. As for what Yasod's take on this is, it's not the first time he's faced a forsaken prisoner, a prisoner of empty anger and regret. Possibly why he was locked up in the first place. That which drove him to such action. The Forsaken Murderers stage is composed of a gloomy medical room with a tiled floor. It had white, barred windows, and various medical tables in the background. So, either prison, hospital, or something in a lunatic asylum. Hard to know which is worse. In the middle of the wall, within the background, is a pair of doors, which are likely cosmetic only, as there's no way out for that abnormality. Now, you might think that soloing in abnormality, even though they're weakened, would be excessively difficult, if not impossible. Well, it depends on the approach. If well equipped, then it's possible. If poorly equipped, then it won't end well. Beyond that, it's random probability. Upon victory, the technological sciences floor increases to level 2, and Yasod gets a second librarian, along with the power of the Forsaken Murderer at his disposal. After that, Roland brought some technological science books to Yasod, and noticed how orderly the books already there were organized. He was almost scared by Yasod's OCD combined with his attention to detail. Yasod again demonstrated this by noticing that Roland's clothes were slovenly, and proceeded to adjust his tie. This made Roland feel awkward, and then Yasod mentioned that proper attitude of the mind begins with a well-conducted body. Has he been reading up on Confucius or Confucius? Roland delivered the books and asked some questions, the first of which was asking if it was true that the librarians there used to be humans long ago, after hearing from Malkuth. Yasod confirmed this. He even asked if there were ringleaders of syndicates, as in seasoned brawlers there before. But Roland suspected otherwise. Yesod confirmed this as well, as, well, he explained that they were proficient in combat despite having no training. Well, 2 of them in their past lives were seasoned combat veterans. It was because of the books, gaining the powers, senses, and strengths of the guests that have been defeated. Basically an in-universe explanation to how the key pages and combat pages work. Basically, books are a source of power, as are emotions. Well, considering what the Botany Corporation dealt with, he's not wrong. And it's also surprising considering how much control he has over his own emotions. In fact, he prefers to have that control. He also goes on to explain that the library can amplify the emotions of those within. All of them. As for what Roland thought about this impressed Roland, but not in the way that Yesod would probably have liked, as he saw the books as a real moneymaker, something better than the surgeries and the tools that most workshops had to offer. Roland, if you think that would make Yesod warm up to you, you're even more of a mess than you've let on. Well, not as bad as Pierre and Jack, but still pretty bad. As for what Yesod thought about this, he saw this as a secular way of looking at things. Roland saw it as a pathetically tearful survival instinct of a man who's lived most of his life in poverty. Well, considering how some people are within that city, he's mild by comparison. After he was done, he thanked Yesod for his answers. Yesod then made it clear that he doesn't think highly of him, and sees him as Angela's little lapdog. You think he had a choice in that matter? Or indeed, any of you? It was a rude way of putting it, and Roland certainly thought so. Then Yesod asked if it exempted him from his guilt. Roland then left, muttering some unintelligible profanity directed at the patron librarian of the floor of technological sciences. Next we have the Streetlights Office. This fixer office is one of the success stories, one that can actually make ends meet by being an associate with an association, specifically the Zwei Association. It helps that they have a similar focus, keeping order, as in dealing with the criminal element in the areas that they're assigned to protect. Well, there's no official police force in that city, where the concept of public service, as in government-funded, is considered about as antiquated as it is a ridiculous concept. And I highly doubt there's going to be a vigilante with a bat fetish appearing anytime soon, so they'll have to do. In this office are 3 fixers that actually look the part. This is due to the fixers that are part of this office being paid a decent wage by the city standards, thanks to their ties with the Zwei Association. So worrying about whether or not they're going to eat won't be a problem, as it is for other officers. They also take on the tasks assigned to them by Zwei Association, although these tasks are usually the least desirable ones, the ones that the Zwei Association would rather not be associated with. These fixers are San, Mars, and Lulu. And they're certainly quite varied, I'll say that much, in personality and methods. Sun is the operator and leader of this fixer office. He has connections within the Zwei Association. He acts almost like a father or older brother to Mars and Lulu. He has a feeling of responsibility when leading missions. Another rare one. Someone who appears to not be affected by the disease of the soul, or at least has some resistance to it. He cares about his fixers and has a sense of accountability. He's a fixer with 8 years of experience, but it's unclear how long he was the operator of the Streetlight Office, which he founded. As for his past, he wasn't always the proficient fixer that he is now. He grew up in the back streets of District 21. So that would be U-Corp territory. They apparently made stasis preservation boxes to make sure that things like food or other materials that are capable of degrading in quality are kept as good as they were when they were locked in place within them. He had a friend called Isadora. Well, good thing too, as he was a coward who put himself in dangerous situations, apparently to train himself, so that he didn't lag behind. It failed miserably, as he ran to Isadora when it often went wrong. In the end, it took them staying out after dark, and him protecting Isadora against an unknown threat. Still not convinced that he's at least resistant to that disease of the soul? Well, they later joined an office and met Julia on the first day, who had only recently started the job as well. They got on quickly. Got on well, and sometime after, he left that office and founded his own, the Streetlight Office, which quickly became an affiliate of the Zwei Association, where Isadora and Julia ended up. He recruited Lulu and Mars sometime after. He had to step in when they got into arguments over the smallest things. As for how he is as a person, he's calm and most of the time, he doesn't let his anger get to him. But he's still a coward and understands when he's fighting a battle he can't win. So he runs away quicker than you can hear yakety sax in the background. He values his bond with his friends and co-workers, almost to the point when it's unprofessional. He wields a baton in battle. Next we have Mars, a fixer that had a head start on many other fixers, due to having a legendary fixer for a mother. Unfortunately, it also meant that he had high expectations for himself, as she was a tough act to follow. She had the ability that most could only dream of having, with a regular supply of expensive equipment that wasn't a case of more money than sense. She also had a number of recruitment offers from fixer offices, but it wasn't a comfortable childhood for him by any means, as he'd have gotten a position in one of the wings if that was the case. And those aren't 100% secure themselves, especially if they off the wrong people. Unfortunately, she off enough people in syndicates, and so that made him a target for assassins. That, and he had high expectations from those that knew him. Whew, that's enough to anyone up. Believe me, I know. At first, it didn't. He wanted to follow in her footsteps and become as good as her. He was a dedicated student, not letting setbacks and failure put him off, believing himself to be an action movie protagonist. Reality sucks, doesn't it? It turned out that he was an average person with no talent, and so became a fixer of a similar quality. Not great, but certainly not Yun's office quality either. His mother was actually glad to hear that he'd been hired by an associate office of the Y Association, and that it was a good place to start, working up slowly. The shame that he had for himself was overwhelming, which he carried with him, even after his mother died and he inherited her sword as he left the house, never to return. Oh, and don't ask about his father. He was never mentioned, although he was most likely dead before she was. As for his time with the Streetlight Office, he often got into arguments with Lulu, his co-worker, over the smallest things. He hid his romantic feelings for her, although with his perceived feelings, he hid those as well. Yeah, he reeks of Sundara, doesn't he? Since his mother's death, he tried to act calm and act the part, but the shame and disappointment remained. As for what he wielded in combat, he wielded a rectangular metallic greatsword. Yeah, as in what he inherited. Ooh, she must have been strong to wield that. That, and she had some quality augmentations. Oh yes, as for Lulu, now that's something else to talk about entirely. Or rather, someone. Now, speaking from personal experience, mental health is not something to consider a joke. Or if you do consider it a joke, it's poor quality. I mean, there's some comedy movies that it'd be distasteful in. Anyway, Lulu is a fixer in the Streetlight Office. Before she joined, she made many friends. in the back streets, but they weren't a group of rats or a powerful syndicate. After she joined, she kept in touch with them, and they'd be willing to assist her. Yeah, quite the social butterfly, even before COVID-19. My social life was non-existent. Well, I wouldn't be doing this if I had one, wouldn't I? Well, regardless, if she needed help, they'd come to her. Come to her aid, rather. She kept the peace, with the help of Mars, or Mr. Rice Cake Face, as she otherwise calls him. Yeah, a fixer that was the son of a legendary fixer. She has an explosive temper, often getting into arguments with Mars over the smallest of things, snapping at him, screaming at him, and even insulting him. Yet despite that, she cares about him, considering him precious. Sorry, couldn't help that. She's conflicted about this. On one hand, it's painful for her to not tell him, but on the other hand, if one of them died, the grief would be crippling. Even acting nonchalant doesn't work, and she envies Mars's ability to be cool-headed at all times. If only that Sundra knew what was tearing him apart inside. During combat, she uses a long baton with yellow and black strips that can be turned into a flaming baton. Yes! It can be set on fire and made to burn. I hope none of you are disturbed. Well, if you've been following through by now, you're probably used to it by now. As for where this fits into the story, it starts with Lulu asking Mars why their office is unpopular with clients, even though they're associated with the Zwei Association and have a 0% crime rate in the areas that they do secure. Well, as long as the contract is in effect. No payment, no securing the area. Mars replied that it was because they cover only 2 blocks. Well, there's only 3 of them, so they must be doing it right. Well, to cover that much of an area, well, Mars was confident that they'd get work soon. Lulu was not so patient, as she's considering moving to another office if they didn't get work soon. As for what Mars thought about that, he had little confidence that she could work in a bigger office. But Lulu was more confident due to her business connections. Then she makes a dig at him being the son of a legendary fixer. Yeah, not the wisest choice to make. And by the time Sane came back, that's their operator, he found himself in the middle of another argument between Mars and Lulu. All because Mars disposed of a limited edition cake in the fridge. privilege that had expired. After that dispute was settled, at least for the time being, San talked about their unofficial work from within Zwei Association, since the Hana Association had no interest in officially addressing the issue that involved the library, a place with valuable books. San then told them that he had an invitation. They questioned the risk, if it would do anything for their careers, and also if there'd be any material gain. San had a bad feeling, as it didn't seem like a good idea, but the bottom line was they needed the money. So, despite the risks, they entered the library. Yeah, so far, no one has actually got out of there to speak of what's in there. Because if they did, they'd warn of what specifically is a danger to them. The librarians, and also who was in charge of it. Angela didn't understand what the associations were. Roland explained that it took more than just setting up an office to get into the business. 12 associations exist, each specializing in different types of work, where cases and requests are sorted according to types and sent to each of them. There are a number of offices with an association above them, which is how Angela understood it. Roland confirmed that it was the correct definition. An association either sends documents to multiple offices at once, or have an associate fixer take care of the work, like with the Streetlight Office. Hana Association is the one above the other associations. They grade the fixers from 9 to color. Authorizes offices. Yeah, bureaucracy is there, even in that world. There's no escape from it, isn't it? Offices have grades as well. As for requests, largely because it's easier to know how valuable a fixer is as a person. Largely because it's easier to do that than to claim, this is my worth, with confidence. It's also quicker to just say what your grade is and what affiliation you have. Well, it certainly sums it up nicely, doesn't it? I mean, who'd want to pay attention to a grade 9 fixer with no affiliation? But a color fixer, on the other hand, that's more likely to be impressive. Angela's comment on this was that it sounded like people stopped trying to learn or think about it at some point in the past. Roland then warned her of the perils of interacting with so many people's wants. Regardless of what she wants. Well, let's just say he saw the grading as a way of adapting to the city. Don't know about that. As things were certainly going downhill, slowly, and in a way that hard to notice for those within the city. Once they arrived, Lulu started to think that they were desperate to take that job. So were the rats, so were Yun's office. Yet they entered anyway. That's the point of the invitation. And just as they were starting to argue again, San, their ever-mediating operator, calmed them down after stopping them. He offered to have a feast at Judy's restaurant on him when they were done. I'm guessing that's not in the back streets of District 23, as that restaurant that he mentioned sounded like the tasteful variety. Yeah, they didn't come across to me as a bunch of cannibals. Then Angela appeared and they greeted each other. As for the invite, he asked if it was meant for them to enter as he borrowed it from someone else. But it turned out that it was intended for him, and it reached him in that way on purpose. They signed their names and the door appeared, so it worked as intended. As Angela would put it. Lulu noticed that Angela wasn't human, but San got her focus on the task at hand and advised them to retreat if it got too dangerous. While San and Lulu got away before they were defeated, Mars, on the other hand, was not so fortunate. After the reception, Roland remarked on the rookies with their tight bonds with each other. That isn't recommended in that line of work. Angela noticed that he's familiar with that. Roland said that he's grown past that phase, but his reaction hints at something. Anyway, the reason for this is the risk associated with that. It's usually best for fixers to cut themselves off from others. Angela sees this as keeping enough distance from people so that the hurt from their losses wouldn't be felt. Roland saw this as ironic, that they apply for a job that involves killing, yet they're unprepared to face death. Well, if it's a little higher than gladiatorial combat in the Roman era, that would make sense, wouldn't it? I say that because the gladiators were basically slaves, prisoners of war, fighting in that arena just so that they could keep on living. It's a little better in the library, but probably not by much. Well, that's not the end of this story. But that will have to wait, as something else came up after this. That'll be in part 2 of the Urban Myth Lore Breakdown. Until next time. Hail the rabbits!